We were on a routine patrol inside this area when two fitters came out. I was about 1,000 feet out in front of him and about 500 feet to his left. It was very close, and he did not take a good shot. His shot was not good at all.
Okay, from F5, passing down my left and right side now. Pass right between the section. 100.
And I turned to go after the one that shot. They were both very close together. When I saw that my wingman was falling in behind him, the other second Libyan airplane had turned the other way, so I turned away from the first guy toward the second guy, and I shot the second guy first, and then told my wingman to shoot the leader of the other section. We were not at war. We were there just to show our presence, and it was in international waters, and if another country were doing exercise off of our coast, we would be going out to look at them, which we kind of expected that the Libyans would be doing to us. The thing that was unusual is to start something.
Like the Gulf of Sidra, almost anywhere a Navy aircraft carrier goes, there's the potential for hostilities. When Commander Kleeman and his wingman shot down those two Libyan fighters, they were on a routine air combat patrol, protecting the carrier battle group. During the first day of that Freedom of the Seas exercise, more than 35 sections of Libyan planes were intercepted by Navy F-14s.
There are an awful lot of things that you try to do during this intercept. Ideally, you would roll out behind this guy without him ever seeing you. Obviously, if he never sees you, he can't hurt you. Warfare is not that simple. The other side has ground controllers. They also have radars in their airplane. They're trying to do the same thing to you. So the normal thing that happens is that you don't end up with any advantage at all at the start. Once you get to the intercept, and normally it will be head-on with no advantage. It then becomes the man with the best airplane, the best training, the best pilot that will win.
This is where the Navy fighter crews find out what it will probably be like to face the enemy in a fight. Oceana is home to the Navy's East Coast Adversary Squadron. They're the people who play the part of the enemy.
Our primary mission is to simulate, to some degree, what we guess to be the best estimates of what the Soviets or third world nations will do with their airplanes in combat.
Being an adversary pilot here for a fighter pilot is the best job in the Navy as far as I'm concerned. Shore-based, you're flying neat airplanes, fly twice a day, doing air combat maneuvering, things that we love all the time.
All the bogey drivers, all the adversaries here at 43 are basically aggressive fighter pilots, as anybody in the fighter community is aggressive.
We provide adversary services. Essentially, we go out and we fly what we predict the threat tactics would be should we ever get into a hostile environment. And the fighter crews are being trained to defend against that.
The Navy's adversary training program began in earnest during the final years of the Vietnam War. It seems that going into Vietnam, there was a school of thought that said the dogfighting days of World War II and Korea were over. In the early 60s, many military leaders thought that advanced technology, faster airplanes, better missiles, smarter radar would make air combat maneuvering obsolete. Once its pilots began flying combat missions in Vietnam, it didn't take the Navy long to figure out it was wrong, that technology alone just didn't cut it.
The reason that we have squadrons like 43 is a result of the conflict that we had in Vietnam. In the early parts of the war, we wound up losing basically a one-to-one, one of our airplanes for every one of their airplanes. And so we figured out that since their airplanes are less expensive than ours, and ours are much more expensive, that we can't afford to continue to lose one of our airplanes for one of their airplanes. The point for having squadrons like us is to ensure that we don't trade one for one, that we do better than that, and even more importantly, not that we don't trade 1 for 12 or 1 for 15 or 1 for 25, is that we don't lose anybody at all.
The U.S. today still relies heavily on superior technology. The Navy's F-14 fighter, with its long-range Phoenix missile system, can stand off for miles and shoot down 6 enemy targets simultaneously, which would seem to preclude the need for close-in fighting.
But in reality, because we are the good guys, we have to make sure that the other guy's wearing a black hat before we shoot at him. So once you get to the merge and you see who you're actually shooting at, and you have positively ID'd him as a bad guy, you're in close. And when you're in close, that is where you have to be able to maneuver the airplane.
In that instance, you have to have a viable fighter that you can employ your dogfight weapons. What is called the rules of engagement, mostly for us on our aircraft carrier, are going to entail what we call a VID, or a visual identification of your target before you fire.
Well, in order to visually identify them, generally that means getting to within close range, where some of the longer range missiles that you're capable of shooting are ineffective because you're inside the minimum range for those missiles. And that's what leads to the classic dogfight arena.
Helping the F-14 crew develop the tactics they need to win in a dogfight and showing them what tactics they can expect from the enemy is what the Adversary Squadron does. It's called the Fleet Fighter Air Combat Maneuvering Readiness Program, or FARP for short. 3 weeks of intensive ACM training for each air crew in the F-14 Squadron. Commander Keith Sheehan is the commanding officer of VF-11, one of the F-14 squadrons to recently go through FARP training. Before his air crews ever face the adversary pilots in the air, they have to understand what the threat is.
We're going to talk about the MiG-17. It is a very simple airframe to maintain. There are not very many moving parts.
While the specifics of what the Navy knows about potential enemy aircraft and training are classified, they can talk about it in a general way.
Part of the Navy's mission is power projection and to protect sea lanes, and so in support of that mission, we have to go all over the world, carriers and so forth, and they can come up with any number of potential threats in any part of the world.
The threat, as we define it, is a type of an airframe that you might encounter in air combat maneuvering, and what may or may not, what you may or may not expect the pilot of that airframe to do. Now that's going to vary, again, from observations, depending on what part of the world you're in.
It's not just the Soviets, not just third world, any kind of threat. And collectively, I think that that's the threat. That's what we're trying to train against.
So a potential threat aircraft could be anything from a Soviet-built MiG-21, which is one of the most exported fighters in the world, to the French Mirage, or even the American-built F-5, which is the fighter of choice for any number of countries. Obviously, the Adversary Squadron can't simulate each aircraft, but the airplanes they do use, the subsonic A-4 and the supersonic F-5, closely resemble, in many ways, the characteristics, handling, and size of the threat aircraft. While none is as advanced technically as the F-14, there are simply a whole lot more of them.
I think that's a pretty much of a given, is that just about any place that you go in the world with an aircraft carrier, that probably you're going to be facing more of their airplanes than what you have fighters available on an aircraft carrier. So the reason that we train with more of us than the fighters is to give them the practice and the experience in going in and meeting a superior enemy in terms of numbers and not losing anybody.
The enemy, in almost all cases that we can predict now, is going to accept a trade-off. If he can lose one of his fighters to get an F-14, he would probably consider that winning. Whereas, again, because of the few number of F-14s on your ship, you can't accept that trade-off. So our goal in FARP is to survive and maximize that trade-off or that kill ratio.
And that's what we train to. The number one priority in any ACM environment is to stay alive, number one, and number two is to kill the bad guy.
With that in mind, the actual air-to-air training begins. Each F-14 aircrew in the squadron will face the adversary pilots on 11 different flights that vary in scenario, beginning with one F-14 against one adversary.
The first several flights, well, the first two are basically warming up, getting used to pulling the airplane around again, because most fleet squadrons don't get an opportunity to do that.
There are hops that there are 2V4, 2V many, it might be as many as 6 bogies out there, and that's not surprising.
The meat of the program is the syllabus hops where we are outnumbered.
The training flights always begin with a briefing. Each side comes up with a game plan based on the assumption that hostilities exist, but where visual identification of the enemy plane is needed before firing.
You don't want them to know how many of us are going to be on the range at one time. That's part of the problem.
We push the aircrews down the road of learning, but we don't put them in a box of narrow thinking saying this is what you have to do, this is what works. We try and say, try it, and if it doesn't work, how about trying this?
The VF-43 folks have been doing this for a living for years, and when they say what works best is this, normally that's what works best.
I think that what you've got to look at is the lessons learned from other fights going back to World War II even. It's still valid. Everything's still valid.
The actual flight takes place on the TAX range, about 60 miles off the North Carolina coast. Special electronic pods on each aircraft allow a computer back at Oceana to record in graphic detail how the flight is going. It's difficult, if not impossible, to photograph the flight in progress, but this is a good representation.
10,000 feet. 10 miles to target, 10 miles to target. Bogies are starting to vector towards you. They are now 1, 5, 9, and 15. Sights on, sights on. Weapons tight. Weapons tight. Okay, from F5, passing down my left and right side now. Your shot of the S5. That's a good shot. Forward is out of the fight. Close is clear. One good bug. You're clear. Right, so let's get out of here if you can.
Fighters coming at you at 500 knots, bogies coming back at them at 500 knots. You know, it's something happens. You don't have time to react. It's very quick and very fluid. For the bogey, it's an enjoyable type arena because we do it every day. We are comfortable in the arena, where the fighter crews, who may not be proficient, are probably more apprehensive. Their pulse rate's probably a little higher than ours.
Things happen in a millisecond, and your brain may digest it at that particular time, but you ask someone what happened, and he can't give you an honest answer until he sits down and actually sees the picture and says, yes, now I remember. Now I remember that snapshot during the fight.
The speed that everything happens in, real world, that's why we need supersonic adversaries. That's why the F-14 is equipped to go supersonically, and the aircrew has to be that fast in their mind, in their thinking, because it will happen that fast. Another reason the tax range is so good, because you have it all recorded. And so we spend a lot less time guessing what we've been doing out there at all that high speed.
approaching Point Bravo, I felt reasonably good.
Yeah. Well, actually, you should have. I mean, you had a really good definition of radar picture. You put missiles in the air, most coast, and you had shots on both sections. You were engaged both elements. We were on the defensive. You guys were exercising the offensive.
In the tax range, if you make a mistake, you can learn from it. Whereas in the real world, you make that mistake, you may not have the opportunity to learn from it.
After the flight, back at the tax range computer building, both sides get to see what happened. The adversary pilots evaluate how well the F-14 crews handled the flight. They look at things like aggressiveness, how well they supported each other, use of the environment, the sun, the clouds, and weapons. Did they shoot anyone? Or survival? Did they get out without being shot? It's called the debrief.
That is probably one of the most important parts of the hop is the debrief, especially with the tax range, a magnificent machine that can allow us to maximize every minute that we're out flying because it's all recorded. We'll give the F-14 crew an opportunity to evaluate their tactics, what they did, tell us what they saw, and then we'll run the tape and observe, in fact, what happened with the recorded data.
The guy can come back and he can play that thing over and over and over and over, and he can look at not just one parameter, but he can look at his speed, his altitude, how much G he had on the airplane. He can look at a whole lot of things and find out how well he's doing. Tax range also now takes account, do you have a radar lock? Did you have the pipper where it was supposed to be? Did the missile time out? Did you keep the radar locked onto him for the missile time of flight? Did you have a sidewinder tone? It takes into consideration a lot of things other than just the way the airplanes were turning.
Before we briefed and debriefed, and these were the training aids we used, fighter pilots always talked with their hands. And now we can come back, and again, maximizing that half-hour flight time, we can replay it. We can dissect and analyze and find out what tactics are working, why they're not working, and if they are, what are we doing right, what are we doing wrong, and what we see.
When they come to a hop and they have a bad hop because they had a bad game plan, they'll come and talk to us and say, this is what we did, why didn't it work, and we'll explain to them. Then we'll tell them how we have seen something else work, and it's very satisfying to see the light dawn and say, oh yeah, that's really, that's something that we could have done better. And the air crews, the learning curve is just tremendous.
In my experience, the F-14 crew that may have died on the tax range in the simulation feels awfully bad.
The positive or negative reinforcement you get by doing the thing correctly or incorrectly. Obviously, if you do it incorrectly, you die, and if you do it right, you survive, and you succeed at your mission. So that's what their learning's all about.
Once they do it 4 or 5 hops in a row, fighting becomes second nature. They become more comfortable in the hostile arena out there, and more relaxed. And the more relaxed you are, the better you can fight the airplane, because you're not reacting. You are more fighting in a logical type manner and driving the fight rather than allowing the bogies to drive the fight.
We have a very tough scenario here. It's not easy at all. And when they have completed their FARP, just the exposure increases their confidence level a lot. Also, their ability to employ their weapons system. That's the single most advantageous thing right there is if you're in a wartime situation and you have the weapons system, you have to employ it. You have to get missiles off your airplane.
I know we've got the superior training and the superior aircraft, but still, when they've got so many of them, it's hard. You have to learn how to survive to come back and fight the next day.
So yes, we do feel a lot better about our abilities at the end of the program because they're at the sharpest part right then.
The VF-43 guys are very good at what they do. If I were going to go up against a real third world type threat, maybe Soviet trained, they're not going to be half as good as these guys are because they probably don't do it every day because they've got the operational commitments just like we do.
I like to believe that these instructors at VF-43 are outstanding fighter pilots. They do it every day. They've seen it. They're true professionals. And I hope that we don't ever encounter anybody that are half as good as them, because they are excellent.